It's about the view. It's become like a medical hospital that displays human misfailure. Like it's like here, let's look at this political oddity. You know, it's like it really is like the left-wing equivalent of a carnival sideshow, except instead of bearded ladies and fat clowns and two-headed cows. Well, let me rephrase that.
Misogyny and sexism.
Sure, all that, and the price of butter. Sunny gets the game ball. If it wasn't for her, asking that question, it might have been a closer election. Oh, nothing really comes to mind. I was like, cha-ching. Listen, they're bitter, they're angry, they're entitled. They also should be. This should have been a reset for everyone who pushed lies and misinformation for the last. They call them Hitler. They call these things. America rejected them, and instead of coming back and saying we lied, they instead are now doubling down. So let her keep doing it, because if she keeps that up, we're going to keep getting the Senate and probably the House and the White House, because people see right through your lies. So keep doing what you're doing. Game ball to Sunny.
It started like any other heated morning on The View. The usual tension, the usual outrage. But this time, something felt different. What began as a simple discussion turned into a live roasting absolute dismantling of Sunny Hostin by two unlikely tag teamers, Greg Gutfeld and Tyrus. And what they pulled off on live TV wasn't just funny, it was brutal. Now, The View has long been known for drama, strong opinions, and fiery debates, but in this episode, it looked more like a live exhibit of media arrogance getting kicked in the teeth. Greg Gutfeld didn't just throw Shada Hay through a full eclipse. He mocked the entire setup of the show, comparing it to a sideshow circus. But instead of clowns and oddities, he pointed straight at the hosts themselves. And the crowd? They didn't know whether to laugh or gasp.
Hostin's obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in Sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe.
He accused the show of turning into a spectacle of human misfailure, where outrage, exaggeration, and self-righteousness take center stage. And at the heart of it, Sunny Hostin. Greg wasn't holding back. He claimed her dramatic style wasn't journalism, it was performance, art, heavy on emotion but light on truth. And the worst part? She walked straight into it. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and bring you even more of these wild stories from the world of TV, drama, and media chaos. Now let's continue.
It's not even that. In The View, you don't need to find Trumpers. You need to fire your race baiters.
Yeah.
You need to fire the two races. You've had people. You had a McCain on there. You've had people on there before, and you ran them off. So the racist ones who want to stick to this, Whoopi and Sunny, and the, was it Bette Midler? What's her name? Yeah, broke-ass Bette Midler. Fire them and bring people in. Maybe you could get McCain to come back. She was a Republican, but every show and every break, she was nearly in tears because she was being attacked.
This wasn't a petty back and forth. It was a televised demolition, and Sunny didn't even realize the wrecking crew had shown up. But the real twist came when the conversation turned to Sunny's personal beliefs, especially her loud support for reparations and her constant focus on white privilege. You've heard her before, right? Always painting herself as a voice for the oppressed, a symbol of racial justice. But then, a discovery surfaced that flipped her whole narrative upside down. On an episode of Finding Your Roots, Sunny Hostin learned that she's actually descended from European slave owners.
The View is a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. You know, how can you now speak the truth and when for years you've been telling lie after lie after lie? Now you're carrying this big bag of rocks around you because it's too harmful for their ego to admit that we really were dishonest. And they could be honest. All they would have to say is, look, we hate Trump so much. We were willing to lie about Joe Biden because we felt he was preferable. We thought our lying and our cover-up was on your behalf. Just say that. You're still scum, but at least you're an honest scum.
Yes, the same Sunny who spent years talking about systemic racism and demanding reparations is part of the lineage she's been condemning. That revelation hit harder than any one-liner. Greg and Tyrus didn't miss a beat. They turned this ancestry bombshell into the centerpiece of their takedown. Greg joked that it explained everything from her obsession with identity politics to her constant need to appear morally superior. And Tyrus? He played it cool, but his reaction stung the most. He simply asked, "So, is she still going to shame people for their heritage, now that she knows hers?" It was a full circle moment. The person who sat on national TV and threw guilt at others had to face her own uncomfortable truth. And when the spotlight hit her, it didn't reveal strength, it exposed contradiction.
The problem is that you have to go after the racist people. And if the CEO goes, you know what, I'm not going to allow a woman on my show or man that will go after white America and talk about them like dogs. That doesn't represent our ideals or values for anyone. And get rid of those people, and this will clear up real quick. So do you have to actually look in the mirror and clean up your own backyard and get the racist people out? Because that's who you allowed in. You allowed black racist on TV who could just go all day and say anything about white people. And I guess lo and behold, they forgot that there's a lot of people at home, white people at home during the day that are not watching your show anymore. So just clean it up.
Yeah, you know, Emily.
This wasn't just irony, it was a gut punch. Greg and Tyrus weren't just calling out a person, they were calling out the entire act. And suddenly, Sunny's usual righteousness started to look a lot more like theater. Now picture this. Sunny Hostin, known for her dramatic, no-nonsense delivery like every sentence is a State of the Union address, comes face-to-face with Greg Gutfeld, who treats politics like a roast battle. And right behind him, Tyrus, the silent sledgehammer. Together, they didn't just challenge her, they flipped her entire serious persona into a punchline. Greg came in hot. He said watching Sunny speak is like listening to a robot pre-programmed to drop progressive buzzwords with zero soul. Every argument, every point delivered with the weight of a funeral. But Greg twisted that into comedy gold. He mocked her tone, her delivery, even the way she stares down the camera like she's about to announce a global disaster. Tyrus, on the other hand, didn't have to raise his voice. He just sat back and waited for the right moment.
Because if she is shaming descendants of this, will she continue to do that when she is now one of them, Dana? And it is funny. She is so wrapped up in identity and she had no idea who she was.
Well, now we understand why she always makes Whoopi get the coffee.
One calm sentence from him had more impact than 10 fiery rants. When Sunny's points started spiraling into complexity and contradictions, Tyrus would break it down in one line so blunt and so honest, the studio air felt like it had been sucked out. They didn't attack her just to be mean. They exposed how her overly serious style makes her easy to parody. That's what made it sting. Sunny wasn't just losing an argument, she was being turned into a walking, talking satire of herself. And for someone who's built her reputation on gravitas and moral authority, that kind of mockery doesn't just hurt, it unravels the whole image. Because once the audience starts laughing at you instead of with you, you've already lost. And then came the part that really hit the view where it hurts. Greg and Tyrus didn't just go after Sunny, they went after the whole structure of the show. According to them, it's not a place for balanced debate anymore. It's become a safe haven for one-sided outrage and selective outrage at that.
Husband against Hillary Clinton, and the bottom
They did all
line
those
is
things.
this country is a misogynistic country, and this country is a country that, out of all of the first world countries, hasn't been able to elect a female president.
So
That's just factual.
Okay, listen.
That's not what I read. The true sign of the apocalypse is someone that dumb has a law degree.
Greg pointed out how the show constantly pushed away anyone who didn't perfectly align with their narrative. He brought up Meghan McCain, a conservative voice who, despite being a co-host, was constantly under fire. He said she was driven to tears on commercial breaks not because of debates, but because of non-stop attacks. And instead of making room for opposing views, the show leaned into a single storyline: blame, shame, repeat. Tyrus took it even further. He said the problem isn't that The View needs more diversity of thought, it's that it needs less racism, and yes, he called it out directly.
Their brains are small. But who's the dumbest one of all? True, none of them are in Mensa, but who's the most densa? Perhaps it's Sunny who mastered the art of making idiots look smart. Now, The View could ask a mirror who's the dumbest one of all, but there's no way that glass doesn't shatter.
He accused the show of letting black hosts openly bash white people without any pushback. According to him, that kind of one-way attack isn't bold or brave, it's just bad TV. And the audience? A lot of them were already gone. Tyrus didn't sugarcoat it. He said the show lost everyday white viewers, not because they were offended by hard truths, but because they were tired of being treated like punching bags. It was a brutal accusation, but one that made people think. Because when a show known for being progressive starts sounding like an echo chamber, the backlash doesn't just come from the outside.
Makes Sunny Hostin, who thinks climate change caused the solar eclipse, the dumbest of them all. Because everyone knows the moon caused the eclipse, which is controlled by The View's gravitational pull.
It starts from the inside and spills out fast. Now, with the foundation of The View already shaken, Greg zoomed in on the heart of the problem: how the media, and Sunny Hostin in particular, hold on to lies like they're some kind of badge of honor. He didn't dance around it. He said flat out, they lied to the public, they called people names, pushed misinformation, and when they got caught, instead of owning up to it, they doubled down. Greg painted a clear picture.
You know, I make fun of The View a lot, but that's only because they keep talking. Those hens are always clucking. They get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, and then I get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, except on purpose. But every now and then, one of those dingbats inadvertently says something that reveals modern liberal thought so perfectly it deserves further study. You know, like a weird serpent that washed up on the beach and you want to poke it with a stick.
He said, imagine carrying around a giant bag of rocksevery, one of them, a lie you've told. Now it's too heavy to drop, because admitting the truth would mean admitting you've been dishonest all along. And no one on that stage wants to do that. They'd rather keep dragging the bag. And he didn't stop there. He said, if they had just come clean, just said, we hated Trump so much, we were willing to lie about Biden, at least people could respect the honesty. But instead, they wrapped those lies in emotion and delivered them with that same serious face, hoping the audience wouldn't notice. But the audience did notice, and Greg made sure they remembered. To him, Sunny wasn't just a TV host, she was a symbol of everything fake about mainstream political commentary. The scripted outrage, the moral superiority, the designer empathy.
She had to tell the audience that she tips big because even she knows she sounds insufferable. Hey, I'm an but at least I tip. This dame probably virtue signals on the toilet. But that's not the point here. While everybody else was trying to figure out how to survive as the government told us that breathing in public could kill us, Sunny was lolling around in her big house clicking on pictures of arugula while mixing Cocoa Puffs into her Haagen-Dazs. Oh, the oppression. I wonder if she wiped down the groceries herself or had her maid do it.
He cut through that with sarcasm so sharp it practically glowed. And when he laughed at it all, it wasn't just to be funny. It was to say, this whole performance, this sanctimonious act, it's over. But this roast wasn't just about lies or contradictions. It was about exposing the performance. Greg made it crystal clear. Sunny Hostin isn't just a pundit, she's a character in a daytime soap opera, acting out a script full of virtue signaling, righteous anger, and dramatic pauses. And for Greg, every line she delivers feels like it's aimed at scoring points, not telling the truth. He mocked the way she turns every topic into a lecture, as if the audience is sitting in detention and she's the headmistress. He joked that her arguments sound less like real opinions and more like a robot malfunctioning, repeating phrases like systemic injustice and privilege until even her own fans start tuning out. And then, right on cue, Tyrus stepped in, quiet, calm, deadly. He pointed out the absurdity of it all in one line, that The View doesn't need to find more Trump supporters, it needs to fire its race baiters. He didn't flinch. He called Sunny and Whoopi by name. Said they turned the show into a platform for one-sided blame, driving off anyone who didn't toe the line. Greg and Tyrus painted The View not as a talk show, but as a political stage play with predictable scripts and recycled outrage. And Sunny? She wasn't just part of it. She was the star actress in a drama no one wanted to watch anymore. By the time they were done, it wasn't just Sunny's arguments that looked ridiculous, it was the entire show around her. At this point, the takedown was fully in motion, and it only got nastier. Greg Gutfeld took aim at The View's structure, calling it a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. In other words, they've spent so many years doubling down on the same narrative, they can't afford to change course now. Even if it's crumbling, even if the audience is tuning out, they've invested too much in their own self-righteous image to admit they were wrong. Greg didn't mince words. He said all they had to do was be honest, just admit, we hated Trump so much we covered for Biden. But instead, they're dragging their reputations through the mud just to keep up the act. He painted Sunny Hostin as the face of that act, the TV personality who talks with the seriousness of a preacher but delivers content that sounds more like a broken record. Then Greg went further. He said she's become the mascot for everything wrong with daytime political TV. Not because she's passionate, but because her passion is packaged, prepped, and performed. And that's what makes her so easy to parody. Every time Sunny delivers a deep, emotional monologue, Greg responds with a joke that makes the whole thing feel hollow. Not because the topics don't matter, but because the way she delivers them feels like a performance. Seriousness without self-awareness. Outrage without humor. That's what Greg shredded. He didn't just insult her, he ripped apart the entire way she communicates. And just like that, Sunny's greatest strength or intensity started looking more like her biggest weakness. And then came Tyrus slow, steady, and absolutely ruthless. While Greg was the spark, Tyrus was the fire that burned slow but hot. He didn't joke around. He didn't yell. He just dropped one truth after another, like quiet punches that landed harder than anything shouted across the table. Tyrus looked straight at the heart of the problem. Racism on television, but not the kind The View always talks about. No, he said it plainly. The show had no problem airing hosts who constantly trashed white Americans. And the people at home? They noticed. According to Tyrus, that's why viewers stopped watching. Not because they were afraid of tough conversations, but because they were tired of being casually insulted by the very people asking for their trust. He said the solution was simple, clean house. If someone on that show is promoting hate, even if they do it under the mask of justice, they need to go. He didn't tiptoe around it. He said a CEO with any backbone would remove anyone attacking entire groups of people, regardless of race, because racism is racism, no matter who it's aimed at. Tyrus wasn't being flashy. He was being surgical. Every word was quiet but cutting. And it made one thing crystal clear. While Sunny Hostin was performing her role as the moral authority, people like Tyrus were watching and calling out every contradiction. He made it obvious. You can't build a show on outrage, push people away, then wonder why nobody trusts you anymore. Now here's where things got even more surgical. While Greg kept the heat on with his rapid-fire sarcasm, Tyrus sharpened his blade with something even deadlier timing. He knew exactly when to strike. He didn't drown the room in noise. He let the silence do half the damage. And Sunny? She had no defense for it. See, when Sunny dives into her arguments, she tends to layer them up big words, heavy emotion, complex logic. But Tyrus cut right through it. When her points started sounding like a lecture nobody asked for, Tyrus would drop a one-liner so brutally simple, it collapsed everything she said before. That's what made his style so lethal. He wasn't trying to out-talk her, he just watched her tie herself in knots, then calmly pointed out how ridiculous it all sounded. And that calmness? That's what made it sting. No shouting, no dramatic flair, just facts dropped like anvils. Greg was the showman, sarcastic, fiery, dancing through his commentary like it was stand-up comedy. Tyrus was the hitman, quiet, precise, always hitting below the noise. Together, they exposed how Sunny's over-the-top seriousness didn't add weight to her words, it made her a target. She was always trying to sound 10 times smarter than everyone else in the room. But when she stumbled or made a contradiction, that heavy tone made the fall even harder. With every zinger from Tyrus, Sunny's iron wall of confidence started to crack. She was outplayed, outpaced, and worst of all out-timed. As the beatdown continued, it became clear this wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a full-blown spectacle. And what really made it unforgettable was how perfectly Greg and Tyrus worked together. They didn't step on each other's lines. They didn't compete for the spotlight. They were locked in, like a well-practiced comedy duo on a mission. Greg started every round with energy pacing, sarcasm, razor-sharp setups. He painted Sunny as the queen of sanctimony, always standing on some moral pedestal, wagging her finger at the world. He laid out the setup, turning her TV presence into a caricature over-dramatic, over-polished, and under-questioned. Then came Tyrus. Cool, measured. He'd pause, let the audience breathe, then drop a line so simple and cutting it felt like the floor dropped out from under Sunny. One moment, he was comparing her seriousness to a soap opera actress who forgot her lines. The next, he was jabbing at her obsession with identity, now ironic, since she turned out to be related to the very slave owners she spent years criticizing. They danced around her defenses with ease. Greg's jokes softened the ground. Tyrus's one-liners finished the job. It wasn't just funny, it was strategic. Like watching a lion distract the prey while the crocodile grabs the kill. Every line was calculated. Every moment choreographed to tear down the image Sunny had built for years. Not just as a pundit, but as an untouchable voice of truth. And in this showdown, the truth didn't save her. It exposed her. By now, Sunny Hostin was completely cornered her usual defense. That rock-solid seriousness was crumbling fast. Every time she tried to lean into her signature tone, the one dripping with importance, like she's breaking news from a war zone, Greg and Tyrus were there to flip it into a joke. Greg mocked her delivery, saying it sounded like she was powered by a glitchy software update. He joked that her outrage wasn't even real anymore, just a built-in setting that turned on whenever someone disagreed with her. It wasn't passion, it was programming. Like a robot that only knows how to be offended. And then Tyrus hit her with that deadpan magic. No theatrics, just one brutal line after another, calling her out for being so wrapped up in identity politics, she didn't even know who she really was. He said, now it makes sense why she always makes Whoopi get the coffee, because somewhere deep down, she was living in a story that wasn't hers. The timing between them was unreal. Greg would light the fuse with a fast joke, then Tyrus would calmly walk in and drop the bomb. Over and over again, Sunny tried to pull herself back into that role of the moral warrior, but they didn't give her space to breathe. They dismantled her in real time. Her go-to moves, long-winded rebuttals, stern expressions, emotional pleas fell flat. Not because they weren't intense, but because they were predictable. And predictability, in a room full of professional cynics, that's fatal. Sunny didn't just lose control of the narrative, she became the narrative. And that's when it became bigger than just Sunny. Greg and Tyrus weren't just roasting one co-host, they were shredding the whole idea of how political commentary works on shows like The View. They weren't mocking for laughs alone. They were making a point. The age of polished, self-important punditry was dying, and they were digging the grave with punchlines. Greg went off about how people are tired of being lectured by TV personalities who act like they hold all the moral keys. He said Sunny's entire presence was built on this carefully choreographed act like a TED Talk delivered by a malfunctioning motivational speaker. Her points were buried under so much performance you couldn't tell if it was a debate or an audition. But here's what made it sting. Greg and Tyrus weren't yelling. They weren't throwing tantrums. They were laughing. And that laughter said everything. It said, "We see through you, and now everyone else does too." Tyrus took it home. He didn't need fancy metaphors. He just looked at the whole scene and broke it down to its raw parts. He said Sunny's high-octane seriousness only works if people believe it's real. But once the mask slips, once it's exposed as an act, it's over. They didn't just ruin her credibility. They torched the very format she thrives in. Long speeches? Useless. Emotional gravitas? Mocked into silence. When humor slices through the noise, there's no speech dramatic enough to stop the bleeding. This wasn't a debate, it was a cultural shift, and Sunny Hostin, the face of the old guard, just got steamrolled by sarcasm. And the final blow? It was almost poetic. Greg, always with that mischievous grin, brought the whole takedown full circle. He mocked how The View constantly blames society, misogyny, sexism, whatever fits that day's headline for not electing a female president, all while Sunny throws out her law degree like it's proof of divine wisdom. Greg didn't buy it for a second. He flat out said, "The true sign of the apocalypse is someone that dumb having a law degree." But it wasn't just a jab at her intelligence, it was a takedown of everything The View tries to represent. While they sit in designer outfits, talking down to middle America, Greg and Tyrus flipped the script. They said the real voice of the people wasn't outrage, it was laughter. Tyrus added that Sunny even had to tell the audience she tips big just to seem likable. He joked she probably virtue signals on the toilet. It was savage. But also, it made a point. While everyday people were trying to survive, deal with lockdowns, and make ends meet, Sunny was lounging in luxury, ranting about oppression between sips of overpriced coffee. Greg made it sound absurdant it was. This wasn't just entertainment. This was a message. A loud, sarcastic warning shot at the polished, preachy media elite. Greg and Tyrus weren't just roasting Sunny Hostin, they were tearing down the stage she stood on. And by the end, one thing was crystal clear. In today's world, truth doesn't wear a serious face it walks in laughing. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.